Call this work session of the City Council to order. I'm acting mayor until acting Mayor pt1 can get here. And I'll take care of the easy stuff. Let's all stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So a little bit of housekeeping. The Finance Committee did meet this morning, and we have some recommendations to relay to you, but this is primarily intended to be for all of those who haven't enjoyed the 22 meetings of the Finance Committee to be able to get in your licks. And we feel this is necessary because we've been pretty much admonished that we need to pass the budget on June 18th, no matter how long it takes us, because if we dally longer than that, it makes it awfully tough on the state and the county to get the tax rate in and other things. So there's a lot of pressure for us to do that. What typically happens in council meetings at budget time is there are a number of council members who will want to come in and make their own recommendations about the budget, which of course is your right. As evening goes on and it gets closer and closer to 3 o'clock in the morning, people lose patience about hearing about things, and there has been a history of people calling the question as we go through. And we have several pieces of legislation to vote on the 18th. So what we really wanted to hear is, and have everybody have a chance to hear from each of you, is the Finance Committee has made its recommendation. It's only that, a recommendation. You have your own ideas, and we'd like to have some time for you to be able to bounce those ideas off of all of your colleagues on the council. This morning, the Finance Committee went through the latest schedule, the one that Teresa gave us. I don't know. We've had so many numbers, I don't know. But I hope everyone has a schedule which is the new cents per hundred document. If you don't, then maybe you need to get it, but we can make the Finance Committee recommendations fairly short. The Finance Committee would like to be able to promulgate a tax rate increase that is less than 13 cents per hundred, or 2.9 as the rework numbers came out to. And so we looked at things where we felt we had some discretion in the numbers to change policy. And where we focused is on the policy that was actually passed by the council 2 budgets ago of financing capital programs such as streets and sidewalks out of the general fund. And that's $1 million for roads. That's $1 million of $3 million for roads, and $600,000 for sidewalks. And there were several options available to us, but what we voted on was to recommend that we finance that $1.6 million by repurposing bonds that have already been issued but unspent. There's 2 major pools for those bonds. One is $6.5 million of monies to rebuild the Spa Road facility. The other is $1.6 million that would be for rebricking Main Street. We chose, actually it's more than that, isn't it? 2.1? Right. We chose, since Main Street is still up in the air and the mayor is seemingly planning on doing a mock-up of what a new plan would look like, is not going to likely happen in fiscal 19. So we are recommending to you that we repurpose that money in 19 for the paving of the streets and repairs of sidewalks, and defer the rebricking of Main Street financing until the 2020 CIP. That amounts to 2.4 cents, and taking off of the, oh goody, yeah. But Teresa, I don't think everybody has this one. That's coming. Oh, good. Which would take us down to a tax rate increase, not touching anything else, although there are some things that many of us want to touch, would take us down to a tax rate increase of 10.5 cents. So that is the recommendation from the finance, fresh off the press from this morning. And other than that, I think it's open mic, and I will say for myself, and I suspect my colleagues on the Finance Committee, we're tired of talking. We want to hear from you guys. Although Mark is not tired of talking. He wants to be heard now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, or Mr. Acting Mayor. No, thank you for that recap. And I guess also today, for the benefits of our colleagues who haven't been through the Finance Committee meeting, as we discussed, was kind of, I guess, remarks or presentation by Teresa in terms of how we got back to where we are now. That's what would be helpful, right? So my suggestion would be we start out there and then hear our colleagues' ideas or amendments. Does that sound good? Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, for those of you who don't know, it's Teresa's birthday today.
Yesterday.
Wow.
All right.
Happy birthday
to you. Happy birthday
to you. Happy birthday, dear Teresa. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you. That was on television, you guys. Okay.
Now in Spanish.
Yeah. Okay. So you have a 2-page, what's this called? Landscape paper? No, it's not portrait paper. Whatever it is. You've got a long piece of paper, two pages. Thank you. So what I did was, after I finally had some time to go through and scrub the budget myself and to look at some things. So as I did that, I found some increases in revenue that I thought were not in the budget that we will have. I found some decreases in revenue where I thought the revenues were overstated, and that's our big problem that we will need to address. I found some expenses that could be cut. I found some expenses that I thought were understated and needed to be increased. I will get you down to a bottom line. Should the council do this, the Office of Finance will draw up the appropriate amendments. This is just to show you the numbers and the concepts of how we get there. So at the very top, you'll see an increase of $1.4 million in income taxes. That's been out there for a while now. And I want to make sure that everyone understands that is not a result of the changes in the federal tax law. Mr. Arnett, did you hear that? It's not because the federal tax law changed. It's because that's how much we get in income tax revenue. This year we're going to get $7.8 million. I think based on economic growth, we'll get 2.5% more next year, absent any change in the tax law. I think the change in the tax law will affect the number, and that it will be big. It will likely result in an increase, but no one knows how people's tax behaviors right now are going to change as a result of the tax law, and I'm not going to build a budget around a number that can't be predicted. So that's the first number. The second number is red light revenue. So you know that we get revenue from the red light cameras. Right now, what we have been doing is understating that revenue because we have been posting the related expense directly to the revenue account. That's not how we should do it. We should recognize the revenue, we should appropriate the expense. So you'll see 74,000 more revenue up top, but when we get down further, you're also gonna see 74,000 of an expense that hasn't been posted to an expense account before.
Is red light revenue the same as speed cameras?
No.
No?
Speed
Okay.
camera revenue, the way the contract is written, is we get a net check. So we don't have the same issue with the speed cameras.
Okay. I
Okay?
was gonna say, I think you picked up more than 74,000 on Farragut Road over 3 or 4 months in my ward. God knows I heard about it.
No, and this isn't the total red light revenue. This is the understatement of red light revenue as a result of posting expenses directly to a revenue account. The next line is investment income. In a similar situation, we paid Dunbar to pick up our money, and we have been posting the Dunbar expense to investment income. So now we're not going to do that anymore. So investment income goes up, and we're going to appropriate the related expense. So that's going to net out down at the bottom. Highway user revenue, we have a letter from the state saying we're going to get $1,270,000 something, and we only budgeted $1,170,000, so we're going to get 100,000 more. Rents and concession revenue, I believe, is going to go, we will have less than what is in the budget. This line item includes income from the operations of Eisenhower Golf Course that we no longer own. So that's a revenue correction. And then you'll see the next 6 lines, starting with the 718,000 and going down to the 92,300. That totals about 2.8 million. And this is what became, I'm going to call it the hole in the budget. So every year, the general fund provides certain services to the enterprise funds. Finance pays their bills, purchasing procures their goods, the law office gives them legal advice, HR hires their employees, etc. So the enterprise funds very appropriately reimburse the general fund for the expenses incurred on their behalf. But the question is, what should that amount be? So when I asked for the calculation from the Office of Finance when I was first hired, I got a spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet, one, has a methodology that I believe is flawed because it's allocating the costs of some departments to the enterprise funds that I don't believe are administrative departments. It's allocating part of planning and zoning to the enterprise funds. It's allocating part of the Office of Environmental Policy to the enterprise funds. Planning and zoning doesn't provide any services to the enterprise funds. That's not appropriate. When I go down the calculation, I get to the bottom, and there is a calculated number of what should come from the enterprise fund to the general fund. And then I go to the budget, and the amount in the budget is more than the calculated number. So the calculated number is flawed, and then what's in the budget is even more than that number. So I went through, I allocated the costs as I thought they were appropriated. I allocated the administrative departments, which come to about 9 million, not 12 point some million, which is what got allocated in the original calculation. And these are the adjustments I have. I think it is highly inappropriate to take this money out of the enterprise fund to make the general fund have enough revenue to pay for its expenses if it's not reimbursing the general fund specifically for expenses incurred on behalf of the enterprise funds. So this means if we were to do this, that we would be using water and sewer ratepayers' money to pay firefighters and cops and accountants and lawyers and purchasing and MIT, etc. So I'm not going to do that. It's not appropriate on a budget basis. It's not appropriate under generally accepted accounting principles. It's just the wrong thing to do. So that, unfortunately, created a $2.8 million loss of revenue in the budget. Budgeted revenue, actual revenues will be 2.8 million less than what's in the budget, plus the 220 that's related to Eisenhower. So that's a $3 million revenue shortfall. Yes?
So, does this also mean, to the extent that the various departments were reimbursed by these amounts, that it's a loss of revenue. For example, I do think planning and zoning, and I would think also OLP would be involved in some capital projects in terms of pipes and maintaining the stormwater stuff. Was this monies that were going into their budgets that now will not be in their budget?
First of all, these monies aren't going into anybody's individual budget. They are
Okay.
revenues to the general fund, just like income taxes and property taxes.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
Secondly, in the CIP, each project has an overhead rate that is intended to reimburse the general fund for the costs the general fund incurs on behalf of the capital improvement
Right.
fund, capital projects
Okay.
fund. None of these are transfers from the capital projects fund.
Okay, that's what I needed to hear. Thank you.
Okay? Yes?
Did each of them have a consistent algorithm that they were using to determine how much to contribute back to the general fund? Was there a consistent principle across the board that was being applied to each of them?
So the methodology, and my understanding is, one, this is the first year there's even been a methodology. Okay, if you go back to prior years, no one can find the methodology used to develop the number in the first place. So if I look at the methodology, the former finance director took the cost of, let me look at all my department heads sitting out here. The cost of planning and zoning, purchasing, MIT, HR, finance, law, environmental policy, mayor's office, and said, I've got $12.5 million of cost to allocate to each of the enterprise funds, DPW, police, fire, Recs and Parks, the departments that provide services to the public, as opposed to the departments that are providing services internally. So one, the base number that was being allocated was too much, because it included departments that shouldn't be allocated. Secondly, when you got to the bottom and there was a calculated number, there was then more in the budget than that calculation. And it was not a consistent 5% more or anything like that. It was, and I didn't bother to go there. The methodology was flawed. The amount in the budget didn't match the calculation at the end. I just said, I need to come up with my own methodology, and not my own methodology, but I need to come up with a sound methodology for doing this. I developed a methodology. I reviewed it with Tricia. I reviewed it with David Gerald, because a lot of it was allocating DPW costs. And I believe that the number is $2.8 million less. And I'd be happy to share that calculation with either of them, both of them, with anybody who wants to see them.
When you say that it was more in the budget, you're saying that it was, can you explain that?
So, I don't have my laptop up, but if you got down to the bottom and it said the water fund should contribute $900,000 to the general fund, when I go to the budget, it has $1,050,000, not 900.
So we were allocating based on a number that we were never going to reach in revenue.
We were calculating improperly the costs incurred by the general fund on behalf of the enterprise funds, and then we were bumping it up even more, because it creates, the higher the number, the more revenue you have in the general fund. So we were balancing the general fund by improperly taking money out of the enterprise funds.
So we were actually contributing that amount to
You
the
take it out
general
of the
fund
enterprise
at
fund and
some
you put
point.
it in the general fund as a revenue.
Okay, thank you.
So, Teresa, would it be fair to say then that it was done just to balance? I mean, in full transparency, it sounds like it's stealing from Peter to pay Paul. I'm sorry, that's what it sounds like. I mean, to balance. It doesn't sound like there was any calculated methodology, that this was just to get it balanced. Is that a fair statement? I mean, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but or an error.
I can't attribute intent or purpose
Mm-hmm.
I can only tell you the calculation is wrong.
Understood.
Okay. The next line, we had talked about the parking fund transfers $2.5 million to the general fund, which then gets transferred to the transportation fund. You have an ordinance before you that makes that a direct transfer. So the parking fund won't be giving the general fund $2.5 million, and the general fund won't be paying the transportation fund $2.5 million. So that'll be a net zero effect. And it's going to go directly from the parking fund to transportation. So I need, on the general fund side, to show 2.5 million less of revenue. Down below, you'll see 2.5 million less of expenses as well. All right. So those are my, and then I'm sorry, the very last line under the revenue section is, I am proposing, the mayor is proposing, you have $1 million of PAYGO funding that goes from the general fund to the capital projects fund for vehicle replacements. I am recommending that we establish a vehicle replacement fund, which would be an internal service fund, and instead of putting the money in the CIP, we're going to put it in that fund, and we're going to buy vehicles or lease vehicles from that fund, instead of it being a capital project. So that's the revenue side. Moving down to the expense side, if you see a negative number, it's a cut to expenses. If you see a positive number, it's an increase. So the first line under the expenses is, as you know, the salary schedules that were provided to me, that I provided to you very early on in the budget session, I don't know if you all know this, they were put together in September. Melissa and I started looking at health insurance expenses with Tricia and thought perhaps the increase in health insurance expenses were overstated. And as we scrubbed that, we decided we're going to rerun the entire salary and benefit schedule, which we did in the last week or two. It's not, this information isn't more than 2 weeks old. And we found that, in fact, salaries and benefits are overstated. And it is primarily related to health insurance. So you can cut salaries and expenditures in the general fund. I'm sorry I didn't print out for you. I have it by department for amendment purposes, but you can cut $734,000 from the general fund, $191,200 from water, $154,000 from sewer. We actually need to increase the transportation fund, $103,500, and $85,000 increase in watershed protection fund. The next 3 lines are simply corrections for grant allocations. So one of the other things I'm proposing is, right now you have the general fund, and then we have a gross number, and we subtract out what's going to be grant funded to get to a net general fund number. I don't believe that's the appropriate way to budget or show or disclose our grants. So we're going to take all those negative numbers out, has no effect on the general fund. We're going to show them as revenue in a grant fund and expenses in a grant fund. So when we take the actual grant awards that we know about, and we correct the budget to reflect the actuals, these are the corrections we get. We can cut the general fund $22,600 for police, $15,000 for recs and parks, and we can cut the transportation fund $94,700. Moving to the next line, this $25,000 Dunbar expenses, that's where we were posting those to investment income. We're going to correct that. In the fire department, they currently pay the fee to the company that collects our ambulance fees. The more runs they make, the more revenue they generate, the more they have to pay the company. But we don't budget that appropriately enough, and so then when they have to pay the company more, they're not doing other firefighter things that they need to do to pay that bill. So we're taking it out, we're putting it in non-allocated so that their expenses are for firefighting and paramedic related things, not collection of revenue. In the mayor's, the next 3 lines go together: mayor's office, Office of Environmental Policy, and Planning and Zoning. The Office of Environmental Policy, when it was reorganized, we established a budget for salaries in that department, but we didn't give them any office supplies or copier or printing or postage or things like that. So their cell phones currently are paid out of the mayor's budget. Their copier currently is paid out of planning and zoning's budget. Their office supplies are coming out of planning and zoning. So I want to create a budget for their telephone, office supplies, copier, and training and education, which are actually certifications for their arborist, so that they have their own budget and they're responsible for living within their budget and monitoring their expenses and carrying out their business. So that's just a net change, moving it to the appropriate department. In planning and zoning, there is already $120,000 budgeted for the comprehensive plan. It's really going to cost $245,000, $250,000. My understanding is that we have taken money that's really general fund balance from prior years. We've put it into a fund that we've called a revolving fund, and we're spending, we told Mr. Gutwald we'll pay for half of the study out of there. You can't do that. You have to appropriate it in the general fund, in his budget, for him to have the authority to spend the money. So what's in that, quote, revolving fund is going to fall to fund balance. This is going to put the expense where it belongs in Mr. Gutwald's budget, so, excuse me, so he can enter into a contract with a legal appropriation to carry out the comprehensive plan. Same thing on the next line item is a similar situation where expenses, recurring expenses for economic development office have been being paid out of a revolving fund funded from prior year fund balances that aren't appropriated. It's not, every expenditure has to have an appropriation in the city code. Excuse me. Next is the police department, $70,000. I sat down with Captain Amoya and scrubbed their contract services, the body-worn cameras, the tasers, the contracts related to it all. And there's $70,000 too much in there. And the department agrees that that can be reduced. The next line is the $74,000 expense for the red light cameras. And then I have a $20,000 correction to the police for a different grant and a $40,000 correction to Recs and Parks for a grant. In transportation, I have an $1,800 grant correction.
Any questions so far? Yes, Alderwoman Henson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Acting Mayor. Teresa, with the corrections that were made to the projected salaries and benefits, I'm looking at the schedule that we received originally, I think it was maybe a month or so ago, and it has on there, it's my understanding it may have been generated as long ago as September, but it does have on there some of the positions of the current administration, even the African American liaison, the second position that was added. I want to be able to kind of take a meaningful look at that and really kind of get a handle on the positions and what we have going on. The 734 that you found, did that include taking away any vacant positions, or that number there, withdrawing that, was that just cleaning up the salaries and benefits, or what does that number reflect?
So we had the schedule that Bruce Miller had run in September. And I don't know if you were at the Finance Committee meeting or watched the Finance Committee meeting where we had put a number out there, and then I came back and said, oh, sorry, we found some discrepancies. So we fixed, because the mayor's office was the first page, and the health insurance was wrong. We knew that there were people who had health insurance that weren't on Mr. Miller's schedule, people who had family health insurance that it was single, or single that it was family. There were all sorts of discrepancies. So on what you got, it was the September schedule fixed for what I knew in the mayor's office.
Okay.
But everything else was September. Then Melissa reran and Tricia reran the entire thing 2 weeks ago. So this just says, what should it be based on 2 weeks ago with the increase in health insurance at 8% for medical, 5% for dental, no increase for vision. Their current salaries as of today, anybody who might be eligible for a step between now and July, that makes it their July salary. When they might be eligible for a step in the next year, say it's in September, I've got 9 months worth of that budgeted in to take it out and say, what should the budget be in FY19 for existing positions. And how does that compare to what's in the budget? So it really kind of takes what you were given a month ago that came from September with corrections to the mayor's office and just throw it out.
Can we get
We
a
would-
new one of these that's
Yes.
updated?
Yep,
Excellent,
certainly.
thank you.
Mr. Mayor? Yes. Thank you, Acting Mayor Paone. Do we have a handle on these revolving funds?
She's saying that word.
Huh?
That word has been forbidden, no.
What did I say?
Revolving fund.
The dollar
We-
jar.
we
has put a
do.
dollar in the.
We do have a handle on it. Melissa and I have a handle on it. When we close the books for FY18 and we have our audit for FY18, all of those revolving funds that are not real funds will go away.
Thank you.
And that money will be in the general fund.
Got it. Good.
Okay.
Any other questions? Madam City Manager.
Okay, so on the second page then, under non-allocated, we have the ambulance fee expense. Came out of the fire department, I'm putting it down here under non-allocated. And we had 100,000 too much budgeted for retiree health insurance. We're gonna have some savings in VEBA because of our fire union negotiations, and this assumes that both the fire union members and the city council ratify that contract. Here's the $1 million that I was transferring to the CIP that I'm now gonna transfer to the vehicle replacement fund. The next line is the expense side in the enterprise funds, reducing the expenses because that money's not gonna come over to the general fund. So you see the 718 in water, the 860 in sewer, et cetera. The next line is the correction for the transportation fund transfer. And then finally, we had some corrections to debt service when we took the amortization schedules, compared them to what was in the budget. The debt for the general fund will go up 3,845. Water fund goes down 105,000. Sewer fund goes down 5,000. Parking fund goes down 718,000. The net effect of all of those things above is, let's look at the good news. The good news is water, sewer, parking, transportation, solid waste, and restoration funds are going to have reductions. And the general fund needs more money. So where can we get more money for this net $562,545 in the general fund? Well, the Finance Committee recommended some additions, $114,500, and then they also recommended some cuts. And if you were to follow their recommendations on both the increases and the decreases, we will have $34,000 of revenues in excess of expenses in the general fund next year. So essentially what I found is about $1,774,000 more of revenue. I found about $700,000 of cuts in addition to the roughly $700,000 that the Finance Committee found. That's 5 cents on the tax rate. And if we didn't have a $3 million error in the revenues, we'd be looking at 8 cents, but we do. And that $3 million is going to be 5 cents on the tax rate. So we're right back to where we started.
Questions? Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the shortfall excess line, is that the most up-to-date balance in those funds?
That's budget. This is the budget. This is the difference in budgeted revenues and budgeted expenses.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just for clarification, when you said it takes us back to where we were, takes us back to the 13-cent tax increase.
Yeah, and that 13-cent schedule is coming back around to you, reflecting this, so that you can see that it gets you right back there.
Any other
So-
questions?
Well, I guess it's a process question. Are we now gonna ask the finance chair to talk about what the recommendation is to help address that? Is that where is that the next step?
Well, we
Or,
don't seem to have a formal agenda that I could find, so I guess we can entertain.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Before you got here, Mr. Chair, I did, but I can do it again quickly. There was the sense of the Finance Committee that we would like to hold the tax rate increase down as much as we can. And we can only do that in very few places. This budget is, especially now, pretty tight. And so it means reversing or offering to you the reversal of a policy decision that we made a couple of budgets ago, which was to fund the repair of streets and sidewalks out of the general fund via PAYGO. The city manager and our bond counsel also have made the argument that, well, PAYGO is prudent in one direction, which is you're saving all of that interest. You could also make an argument that it is fair to fund those repairs by bonds because they are items that last a long time, 20 years. And if you fund them through bonds, you spread it across all of the users over the 20 years. It seemed that we, for this year, because so many things are changing and the budget increases are so big, it would be nice if we could find a way to take care of our streets and sidewalks, but not issue new bond money for those and not take it out of the general fund. And our discussion focused on monies that are currently bond money that is issued but unspent in the capital improvement program. There's only two big pockets of money in that program. One is the $4.6 million for the rebuild of the Public Works facility. That is up in the air now, as is the other item, which is the rebricking of Main Street, where there's $2.1 million. And we opted to recommend to you that we repurpose the $19, the fiscal $19 that had been earmarked for Main Street to do this $1.6 million worth of streets and sidewalks, and I need to explain that number a little bit more, for this year only, and put into the fiscal 2020 schedule in the CIP, put the Main Street repaving back. We understand from the mayor that he is going to do a pilot program on Main Street where he's going to mock up the effect of his plan, which is to take parking off of one side, push the sidewalk out 3 feet, and create a lane that goes down Main Street that carries bicyclists and also the crosstown ferry, leave parking on the other side of the street, and have the traffic come up Main Street as is done traditionally. Our sense was that by the time we test that all out and come up with a new plan, we'll probably be pretty close to fiscal 20 anyway. So that money is money we can touch. There was a disinclination to touch the money for the Spa Road Public Works facility because we really do believe, I think, I will speak for myself, and I believe the rest of the Finance Committee, we think we need to get that facility rebuilt as quickly as possible, recognizing we don't know exactly where that's going to be done, and it might not be done on Spa, and if it's not done on Spa Road, there'll be a longer time while we acquire land and redevelop. The plan for the physical structures should remain the same, and that's already done in terms of the architecture. Going back to the roads and sidewalks, we had recommended to you that we're not really on a 20-year schedule for resurfacing. We're on a 30-year schedule for resurfacing streets because we only do 3 miles a year, and we have 90 miles of street surface. To be on a 20-year, we would need to do 4.5 miles every year. We had proposed a graduated schedule which started off with, in fiscal 19, $2 million being taken out of the Capital Reserve Fund to do the full amount of resurfacing, 4.5 miles of resurfacing. And in each year we would graduate down the amount that came out of the Capital Reserve Fund and increase the amount that came out of the general fund as pay-as-you-go. I think we've had some recalculations of some of the funds also, and we may be tighter in terms of our Capital Reserve Fund than we thought we were. But the recommendation from the Finance Committee, if you choose to follow it, would take our tax rate increase from 12.9% back down to 10.5% after we adjust for all of the corrections and all the new information. It does not mean that we might not need a tax rate increase again in the next year in 2020, but the city manager has promised us that she will do everything humanly possible to prevent that from happening, that we will truly be out of structural deficit. And we have no reason to doubt that, or at least I have no reason to doubt that. So that is the recommendation from the Finance Committee, and there's a mosquito. For your consideration. I think you can mull that over. What we really wanted to allow for this meeting after this update of things was your opportunity to say what it is you don't like about the budget itself, or or some of the Finance Committee recommendations. We did take away some monies from various components, and you may like to see that restored, or you may say that we didn't do enough. We didn't take away enough spending, and that there are even more things we can do to adjust the increase in the tax rate. So I will answer questions, but otherwise I'm going to zip my lip.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I guess I'd get the ball rolling, but I would like to first say thank you to the Finance Committee for all of your work. So all my comments are starting from your base, your recommended budget. And thanks to Teresa and all the department heads for all the information you've been providing us over the past few weeks.
And the staff.
And staff, yes, can't forget staff. Long hours. So as you might be surprised, I'm going to start with some of the environmental amendments that I haven't had a chance to really talk to. And again, thank you for the opportunity to get some of these conversations out before the actual council meeting. But first of all, so in the recommendations from the Finance Committee, there were basically all the Office of Environmental Policy enhancements were denied. So I wanted to talk about a couple of ideas I had in regards to those. I mean, first of all, one of the recommendations was to deny an enhancement for $1,000 for training and education. So at the council meeting, I'll be introducing an amendment to reinstate that $1,000, but actually increase it to $1,500. So here's my reasoning. That $1,000 is for the city arborist to maintain his certification as a professional arborist. That's a job requirement of his. He has to have it. Somebody in the city, it's good to have somebody in the city who has that certification. And that's a minimal amount, so I'd ask that my colleagues consider supporting that amendment. The other $500 in that would be for, I found out we do not have a certified floodplain manager in the city. And so currently those duties reside underneath the Office of Environmental Policy. And this $500, it would allow for certification and continued certification on an annual basis. And so that's one of my proposed changes.
Or do you want to wait till you're finished?
Oh, you can go ahead, yeah, sure.
May I?
Yes.
Can you tell us which of those recommendations, one came in the mayor's original budget proposal, if any?
Yes, the $1,000 was originally proposed to be funded by the mayor's, in the mayor's budget.
The $1,000?
$1,000 for the arborist certification.
For the certification?
Correct.
Did I just hear Ms. Sutherland say that she had allocated funding for that certification?
You did. So on my schedule, I had $500 for that. I have an email from Jackie Gild that said...
for the floodplain.
I'm sorry, mine is for the ISA, the professional memberships that are related to the ISA certification, and for the roadside tree certification. It says we estimate $300 would cover the cost for attending local workshops, seminars, etc., and then $220 for the membership. So the total for urban forester certification and training to keep the certifications in FY19 would be $520. I had $500 on my schedule.
Okay.
That doesn't include that other piece that you just mentioned.
The floodplain.
Yes, the
Okay.
floodplain.
So that would bring the total amount, I guess, that I would propose would be $1,000 for both certifications, the floodplain and the roadside, whatever the arborist training requirements are. Okay, that's good enough. Thank you. Does that answer your question, Alderwoman?
Yes, thank you.
So what is the actual final amount?
$1,000 total. So the original proposed amount in the mayor's budget.
And the tradition of the past, which is of the past, is when you want to find new money, you offer where that money can be taken from. Do you have a...
I thought you were going to zip it. Just kidding. Yeah, well, I'm not going to get into...
I would point out, before Teresa does, that the Finance Committee didn't follow that
Yeah.
either, so...
I'm not going to get into cuts just yet, but I will talk to that a bit. But in this case, I think we owe it to... I think it's important that we fund these requirements that are part of the professional requirements in the department, but also for these individual positions. So the other thing to talk about in the same office is originally proposed by the mayor's budget was $10,000 to go towards education related to the no discharge zone, and that was also recommended for elimination by the Finance Committee. I would recommend, because according to one of the spreadsheets I saw, the Watershed Restoration Fund, the stormwater fee, has a balance of $32,763. Of course, that may be different with all of Teresa's magic she's been working. But, so I propose taking actually $12,000 out of the stormwater fund and using that to pay for no discharge zone education, because the whole purpose of the no discharge zone is to help us meet our pollution reduction targets, and I think that's I think that's an appropriate use of the stormwater fund. So, City Manager, do you have an updated balance for the watershed restoration fund? Or that you could get me at some point?
Do I have an updated balance for the stormwater fund?
Yes.
Is that what the question? I do.
All right.
Give me a minute. The answer is, of course. We estimate that the fund balance at the end of FY18 will be $1.8 million. There's $1.5 million of revenue and roughly $1.5 million of expenses in the mayor's budget as proposed, which I'll remind you is what you're considering amending as the budget is proposed. So yeah, you got enough money to.
How much is there available?
1.8. You'll have 1.8 million left at the end of FY09. So we do have, in draft form at this point, to be presented to you all, a stormwater rate study that shows, that's going to say here's what our permit MS4 stuff is, and here's how we're going to get there and everything. But in the meantime, that isn't happening in 19. So if you wanted to spend 10 or 20,000, whatever the number was, for the no discharge zone, it's not going to have any material impact on that fund.
Okay. Well, but I'm just still trying to understand how much is actually available, because I thought most of that is allocated.
1.8 million is available.
I thought most of that was already allocated towards public works and.
1.8 million is available.
Okay. Well, so I'll have to work with you on the exact numbers and amendment, but when it comes time, I'd actually, if that's the case, I'd actually propose putting forward $20,000 of that money towards the no discharge zone, because, for example, the Back Creek Conservancy has actually put forward over $20,000 of their own money putting together this application, and the more we can put forward, I think it'll help our application to the EPA to show that we are serious about the no discharge zone, because we will need some money for education materials. And it's so. Okay.
So, and I happen to be a fan of the no discharge zone, but is this in advance of getting a no discharge zone passed? This is education in order to help get a zero discharge zone passed, or is this money that would be used after we get, and whenever we get a zero discharge zone? Which we're working jointly with the county, right? City and
Correct, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great question. And this will be used to develop material after the application is submitted, so not to convince people, so to speak. But it's also will be included in there in the application to show the EPA that we are willing to put some money and weight behind this.
Right.
And I feel like it will help us with that application.
But it sounds like we have a source.
Of fund. Yeah. Yeah. So that's So this would be a no change really to the bottom line, but it will. I'll have to figure out how to word the amendment.
So in terms of procedure, is this something that needs to be done during the passage of the budget, or is this something that is just an administrative action
No.
that happens?
Every penny you spend requires an appropriation. The budget for the stormwater fund would have to be increased by $20,000 in order to pay that expense.
Even though there's 1.8 million there already?
You can't spend a penny of that 1.8 without an
Okay.
appropriation.
All right, so we do need to have.
Yep, and
legislative
we'll help you get the correct amendment and wording.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yes, Alderwoman Finlayson.
Thank you. I'm trying to follow, and this outreach for no discharge zone was not in the mayor's original budget. So, and I'm looking at, so I thought, so can you help me?
Yeah, I thought it was,
Yeah,
but
Tim.
because I think it was.
Funded, I'm looking at the document.
What, Sheila, what document are you looking at?
It's
This-
one of the first
one-
ones that has what was requested and what was approved in the mayor's budget.
Is it like one of the 13-cent ones or some comparison to it?
It has all the departments
Okay.
and what was funded in the mayor's budget by department.
Okay. I can't tell you whether that sheet was accurate or not, but I can tell you it is funded in the mayor's budget as proposed on this original pro forma that Bruce had handed out.
Okay.
It's on line 1198.
Okay, if there, and I've got two such documents that say the same thing, because this is what, Mike's not on. This is what we used, when we were going through, Mr. Chair, if you recall, to determine which things we wanted to add or what additional things we wanted to take out of the budget, so I'm not sure, I just want us to be on the same page.
A schedule dated,
And this is,
Yeah. This, I have the schedule, I know what you're talking about, it's wrong. So it says that the requested amount had a total of $57,200 for the Office of Environmental Policy, and then on the right side it says approved amount, and it's a total of $46,000. If you go to the mayor's proposed budget and the other schedule that Mr. Miller handed out, it's $57,200.
okay, so this is a moot point then, because it's already in the budget.
It's in the mayor's budget. Oh, yeah, it's in the mayor's budget as requested. Right. Finance committee is just a recommendation. It's not a cut to the budget unless the entire council adopts it. But, as your city manager, I recommend that you cut the general fund $20,000 and pay for it out of the stormwater fund.
Okay.
So there's another part of this, using the same restoration fund. I'm also planning on proposing taking $20,000 from the electricity restoration fund to pay for the C-bins. There were the marine trash skimmers that were in the original budget as well, mayor's proposed budget. And that was to pay for some of the, essentially they're underwater kind of dumpsters, devices that capture trash in the city dock. And again, because that's a direct impact to our water quality and clean up our stormwater, I thought that'd be appropriate use of that fund. So ultimately it'll be a total of about $40,000 I'd be proposing to take out of that fund.
and when we had testimony, and I don't think you were here, from people on the C-bin, it was pointed out that the most fragile part of that is the pump motor, and it's only warranted for a year. So are you still comfortable with that technology?
Well, I think the name is misleading. The C-bins are a specific type that have a motor, but the skimmer that was in the enhancement, according to my understanding, was a passive collector that will need to be emptied by hand. There are models which some people in the Environmental Commission were pushing that has to be hooked up to electricity and kind of sucks the water in, but this is just a passive, no electricity. Just the maintenance cost will be associated with it. Is that, if I could, Ms. Scott, is that correct? Yeah. Yes, there's a little more. So, let's see. The other thing I was going to propose for keeping the enhancement for Office of Environmental Policy in terms of the $2,000 in supplies, but I'm not sure if that was already addressed by the city manager or not. That sounds like it may have been.
I'm
The
sorry,
$2,000 enhancement proposed by the OEP.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
I
got
think you've already
1,500
addressed that.
for office supplies and 500 for copier.
Okay.
And that copier expense is based on what we really pay for the copier that's sitting in their office, that's currently paid for out of P&Z.
Okay. Thank you for your, so I just have two other items for the same office. Next to last, we have, in the original budget, there was proposed, or I'm sorry, maybe it wasn't in the original budget. One of the original proposed enhancements was $1,200 for STAR membership. And I forget what STAR stands for. Yeah, STAR, Sustainability Membership. It's a national group that helps cities become more sustainable. And so this $1,200 actually would go a long ways. It would provide training for staff. They can attend webinars, and also the STAR organization can review proposals in direct support of initiatives coming out of the office, including resiliency work. And so I think that $1,200 really gets our foot in the door for quite a lot of benefit to that small office and to the city itself. So that's one I don't. So yeah, that's one thing I would definitely recommend. I'm curious what my colleagues may think of that proposal, but I thought it was a low enough amount that we could try to find that money.
Take it out of the mayor's office.
Out of the mayor's office, all right. So the last thing I'd like to talk about is the tree maintenance. There was an enhancement request for $26,000 in additional money for tree maintenance. And just to give my colleagues a little bit of background, there's currently $34,000 in that fund that's for tree maintenance. And this is when you have, well, actually, that money currently is just being spent reactively. So if a tree falls down, if a limb falls down, or if there's, this is what they use to pay the contractor to remove that tree or that limb from the tree. This is not, they don't have enough money to do proactive work in terms of if somebody calls in Eastport, for example, about a limb that may be about to fall or a tree about to fall. This money does not cover that kind of expense. And so,
Public property or private?
these are public trees. So anything within, I forget what it is, it's within, I think, 25 feet of a public right-of-way, it's considered a public tree. And so this has to do with anything in that area. So currently, again, $34,000 in the budget, and they've used up every cent of that for the past few years. That budget used to be $75,000. I'm not exactly sure how many years ago, but I believe it was 4 more years ago. It was $75,000. They were given all the tree maintenance responsibilities. It used to be split between DNEP and Rec and Parks. That all went to DNEP, and they got that boost in money. But I think Panelides may have reduced that to that $34,000. So, you know, in the spirit of kind of showing my commitment when it comes time to make reductions, even to my kind of pet projects, you know, I'd entertain a reduction to this, but I do think it would benefit from a bump of even just $10,000 to go to this fund for additional tree maintenance.
So it's in the mayor's budget at 26.
It's in the mayor's budget as 26. So that's what I'll be coming forward with, because I think it is a public safety issue when you're talking about trees. People do get injured and killed in some communities. We have not had that happen in the city in terms of people getting killed, but we have had injuries and a lot of property damage. So that, I'll be putting that forward for consideration.
I'm sorry, Mr. Savage, it was 20,000? What was that last, how much
The
was it?
original request was for 26, I believe, thousand. My request is for 10,000.
Okay, I'm just trying to keep track of where we
Yeah.
are.
So, and just in general, I'll just end by,
It's a $10,000 increase, right?
no, instead of that 26, go for 10.
But as the absolute amount or an increase?
Be an increase to their budget. Their budget's 34, so an increase to
Right.
44.
So it'd be an increase to
Yeah.
44, right.
And I also just want to end by saying, you know, I think at some point we'll possibly get into talks about some specific cuts. And in general, I really do think just the more I hear about how the numbers are going up instead of down, I'm really concerned about some of the new positions, or as some would call restoring positions. There are a lot of them. Actually, if you total them up, it's about $500,000, which is about 1 cent that we're proposing to spend on new positions or restored positions in this budget. And so I just want to kind of urge my colleagues to look at ways we can even scale that back further.
Before you go, we should say goodbye to Mayor Panelidis.
Oh, Mayor.
Come late and leave early. No.
He's pouring the popcorn over here. I want you all to know that there's popcorn down here.
Changing shifts.
Yeah.
There's no such thing, but there are napkins over here.
So
I know what she's talking about.
See you, Mike.
I was just saying, when you total up all of the new positions that are being proposed or the restoration of positions, it totals about $500,000 or about 1 cent of tax increase. So I would just kind of like urge my colleagues to review those again, to see if we can hold back on funding those. I mean, I'm holding back on some of my own. You know, I'd like to see us get a resiliency officer in the city. And I think if you look at the cultural hazard mitigation plan and the pages of tasks that need to get done, we clearly need that position. But I think this year's budget, with how it's going, I think we really need to hold back off on that. So at that point, I'll just let others talk. Thank you for your indulgence.
Mr. Savage, did you give Ms. Sutherland a total of what all of your amendments would total up to?
I will.
Thank you. I do have a question, and I guess it's for Mr. Director Gerald, because I thought Public Works did something with tree removal also. Can you address that?
Yes, so after the trees fall and they're in the right of way, we clear them away.
So we
That's
do
what we
clear
do.
trees away when they
We
fall
do,
in
so,
the right
so
of
that
way.
falls to, once it falls, no pun intended, that falls to
Okay,
us
even if
once
we
the
don't
tree's
hear
done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Descartes.
Okay. Any other amendments for discussion? Alderwoman Pendle-Charles.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Mayor. I apologize for being late, but anyway, I had sent all of my colleagues, including the mayor and Ms. Sutherland, email early this morning concerning the budget, and basically it surrounds public safety, community ambassadors, and it really focuses on our children. As some of you may know, back in 2006-2007 school year, we had a group of people down at Annapolis High School who were the community ambassadors. And what they did was they were basically the bridge builders between the students, the families, the communities, and the schools. They did a phenomenal job. During that time, after that time, up until now, we started from 12 community ambassadors, and now we are down to 1. That has made a tremendous impact upon the school culture, as well as our Annapolis feeder schools. They started off in 2006 with a pay of $10 per hour, and they worked 20 to 30 hours per week. 16 and a half years later, the one person that's still there is still working for $10 an hour. Recognizing the benefit that these persons receive and the direction in which the program had moved in the school system, I've spoke with Dr. Arlotto, the school superintendent, as well as the equity director, Dr. Gillens, over the past year or more, to restore at least some of these positions. We had a very candid conversation, and at last year's point, Annapolis High had 2 community ambassadors, and they also included North County High School with 3, and the city and 3, so there were 5. Last April of 2017, the city signed an MOU with the Anne Arundel County Public Schools and agreed to pay $42,000, and I believe that was for 4 positions of community ambassadors. The MOU commenced on March the 1st of last year and ended on June 14th of last year, with the condition that it could be renewed by both parties. and I attached a copy of that MOU. Oftentimes, of course, we know with large organizations like the school system, it takes a bit to get things moving. So Dr. Gillens and I have been meeting since September in order to make this program successful again as it was in years past. Miraculously, in early April of this year, the pay for that one community ambassador was increased from $10 an hour to $17.75 an hour, 30 hours per week with benefits. Annapolis High is now paying for that person. They're now also paying for 2 persons at North County High School as well as 1 at Chesapeake High School. And I think we've all been reading in the paper that they've had some real turmoil going on at Chesapeake High, so that is really necessary. Recently, with the substantial bump in pay on these community ambassadors, within the money that the city had allocated last year, $42,000, we will only be able to pay for 2.5 positions. The one position, whole position, would be $19,170. The .5 position would be $9,585. When you take the 2 whole positions, the 2 1.0 positions and the .5 position, you have $47,925. Ideally, we could use 3 more CAs, 3.5 positions. That would bring it to $76,680, but I'm going to leave that for now. Since none of these funds, because they were intended to be used during the 17-18 school year, I assumed that we could use these funds for the 18-19 school year, at least $42,000 that was set aside for the 18-19 school year. However, I was surprised to learn from our city manager last evening that these funds were never set aside by the finance department last year. Going on that premise that they would be, the school system has since hired 2 1.0 positions, and they're in the process of hiring the .5 position. Anecdotally, I provided you with some information concerning the one community ambassador that has survived for these long years, 16 and a half, and they have just hired 2 more, and they are very excited. I sent you a selfie of the young ladies who are, you can tell they are excited about what they're about to embark upon and what they've already embarked upon. Not a day goes by that I don't hear from at least one of them about whatever they're doing. In fact, a few Sundays ago, one of them that I did not know approached me on Gralls parking lot and introduced herself. I had no idea who she was, and she told me who she was and how excited she was about this. They are doing amazing things down there. She emailed me on yesterday to let me know, to ask me for some information about Southwest Airlines job fair because she wanted to get her students involved. One is starting a food pantry in her community, and one is some additional information about that. And as we all know, based on documented and proven information, that children can't learn if they are hungry. So they have embarked on many things, and of course we know that school counselors these days and times, especially in these larger high schools, have upwards of 1,000, if not more, students that they have to deal with. And of course, when you come down to graduation time, it becomes even more difficult to handle those many students. So the community ambassadors have really plugged in the holes to try to help with those homeschool connections that the school system promotes. As far as the data is concerned, I looked at the data. The latest census, Annapolis has 16,136 households. These are the list of the public housing communities, the Hacker communities, and the number of households in each community. Bloomsbury Square, 51, Timothy Gardens, 20, Morris H. Blum, 152, Eastport Terrace, 84, Harbor House, 273, Newtown, 20, 60, Robinwood, 150. The subsidized low-income housing communities, Admiral Oaks, 159 and 60% African American and 40% Latino, Annapolis Gardens, 150, Bay Ridge Gardens, 192, Bywater, 308, College Creek Terrace and Oberry Court, 174, Timothy House, 81, and Woodside Gardens, 144. As far as our different wards, this breaks down the following. Ward 1 has 51, Ward 2, 427, Ward 3, 309, Ward 4, 512, Ward 5, 0, Ward 6, 699, Ward 7, 0, and Ward 8, 0. These total to be 1,998 public and subsidized low-income housing households within the city of Annapolis. Now, I may have missed a few. Therefore, over 12% of the households in Annapolis are either public, subsidized, or low-income households, and at least 98% of these are African American, and that's a large chunk of folks. 12,000% of our households in Annapolis are living either in public housing or subsidized housing. As far as the public safety is concerned, and I will read this, and I gave you a description on how the community ambassadors pretty much operate on a daily and weekend basis. And I use Miss Robin from Robin Wood, and that's a fictitious name. On the weekends, because Miss Robin is so embedded in the community, if she hears about a problem in the community that may spill over into the school on Monday, then she would alert the principal and or the administrator, and the police are contacted if necessary. Oftentimes, Miss Robin and or the school officials would be posted at Robinwood on Monday morning, would ride the bus to Annapolis High School, where once they arrived would be greeted and sincerely welcomed by a whole host of school staff as they dismounted the bus. What may have been a real situation in Annapolis that particular day had now turned into a nothing. In conclusion, to fund 4 to 6 community ambassador positions, anywhere from $47,925 to $76,680, for the purpose of enhancing the quality of life and educational needs of at least 12% of our Annapolis households, I believe is a very worthwhile investment in our communities. I hope that you believe so too. It is a very small amount of money to put out for 12% of our African American households in Annapolis. Therefore, I sincerely ask my colleagues and mayor for your support to fund preferably 6 community ambassador positions, 2 1.0 positions, and 4.5 positions. Any questions? And we can have questions at this point, but I do want to make one comment based on what I heard about Alderman Savage indicating the additional positions. The 4 positions that the mayor has hired in his office, we are now embarking upon a robust mission this summer to make sure that every child in especially the low-income and public housing communities will have the opportunity to engage in at least one meaningful opportunity for a summer experience. So often children go back to school, and I know this because I work in an 800-student elementary school, come back after the summer, and everybody's talking about what they did over the summer, and these children have nothing to say. Many of them have not left their communities, but we are embarking on anything from birth to 24. From birth to 5, we're working on a program through Anne Arundel County Public Schools with 2 persons within the school system who will be working with infants, toddlers, and birth to 5, as far as providing parents and mothers with engaging activities with their children, whether it's baby massage or just bonding with their child. Between 6 and the ages of 12 or 13, we're doing camps. And Annapolis City Rec and Parks, as well as the housing community and also the police department, we're housing the repository of these camps will be on the website and within the Annapolis City Rec and Parks website, as well as we're going to post it on the city website. These 4 persons that the mayor has hired, Mr. Adetola Ajayi is the one who's coordinating all of this, and it's a lot of work to determine and make sure that every child is included in these camps. Between the ages of 13 and 15, we have designed a curriculum of One Annapolis pop-up camps, where children, because they're too young and have aged out of regular camps but are too young to get a job, we're putting together a curriculum, and Mr. Ajayi has put a very robust curriculum together with the help of Mr. Rao, as well as Adriana, as well as Janice Hayes Williams, to cover that age group. Between the ages of 16 and 21, for children who are still in school but not in full-time college, Anne Arundel Workforce Development Corporation, which opened a satellite office on March the 15th at Stanton Community Center, they are working with children, and we have up to 60 slots for those children within Annapolis. As far as the 18 to 24-year-olds, those who have fallen through the cracks, Anne Arundel Workforce Development Corporation, Mr. LeBlanc is working on that population as well, and we're basically knocking on every door. Mr. Ajayi will be having a launch, as well as Ms. Lee, Adriana, on June the 15th at the Stanton Community Center, where they will be having parents sign their children up. They will also be taking the show on the road. They will be going to every community, one of the 13 that I named that have children, to sign up folks for that. We have talked to the Housing Authority and possibly including community service for parents who take the time to fill out the applications and all to get their children signed up. So we're working on that. At the end of the summer, we will be having an end of the summer launch into a new school year. And hopefully the experiences that the children have had over the summer will launch them into a successful school year. We're looking also at programming during the school year for children, where basically there will be incentives given if your parent comes to a back to school night, if your parent comes to the PTA meeting, if the child makes the honor roll, and every quarter children will be rewarded. And I know a lot of educators as well have problems with rewarding children, but as I said to a colleague of mine, if you look on the wall on the payroll sheet, we all get rewarded every 2 weeks. So like adults, we get rewarded, and children. We're not talking about money. We're just talking about maybe a trip to the museum in DC, or Six Flags at the end of the summer, or to the movies, or even a popcorn party, or a pizza party, but something to let the children be incentivized to move on. So that kind of takes us through the summer as well as next year. So we're looking, and this work, and we've been meeting monthly, and Mr. Trader, who's the director of Rec and Parks, has been meeting with us and working with us diligently, as well as Mr. Fisher over the Hacker community, Mr. Ajayi, like I said, Mr. Rao, Ms. Hayes Williams, as well as Adriana Lee. We're all working, and this is a lot of work as far as trying to make sure that we take care of our children. They are part of our population as well. And when you're talking about 12% of the households in Annapolis, and we're looking to spend what I consider not a whole lot of money, I think that says something about a city. When you take care of your children and your families and your communities and those who are vulnerable, and what I've said in many venues, the history of Annapolis is different. And if you didn't grow up here, or you didn't go through the system here, and because I had so many questions being asked about how we got to 39,000 people and 15 low subsidized public housing communities, I did a monologue on City TV, and I would suggest that anybody who's interested in looking at it, because I know I was reading an article today, and people have gotten so cynical about people who are in need. But for the grace of God, there go I. I could have been one of them as well. And so we look at people's circumstances. We try to fix what is broken. I know we have a lot of health concerns in our communities. We're also looking at health and mental health agencies providing services. So when you're talking about inclusive programming for our entire city, and for a person who went through this for 16 and a half years and got paid $10 an hour and still hung in there, to me, that's worth saying. These were people who grew up in these communities and had a passion for the community, and those are the types of people that through the school system we are hiring. They're the ones that, even though they may only be technically working 30 hours, oh no, they're working quite a few more, and on the weekends as well. So I would behoove my colleagues to consider this seriously, to think about our children. They are our future. They are our residents. No, they do not vote, but they are just as important, if not more important, than anyone else in our community, because they can't do what adults can do. They don't have jobs. And so, looking out for those that are the least of us. Thank you very much. Any questions? Yes, Alderman Arnett.
Thank you, Alderwoman Pendel. I kind of got lost way back at the beginning. I'm not sure what these ambassadors do. I got an inkling that they're somehow tied in with our liaison folks in the mayor's office, and I guess what I'm really grasping for is 46,000 or whatever, 72. Where is it being funded from? Is it from police department, the mayor's office? Where does that appropriation come from?
Okay, let me back up on the community ambassador question. No, these were people who were originally hired by the Anne Arundel County Public Schools, based at Annapolis High School. This was back in 2006. They were the bridge builders between the students in the school, the staff in the school, the families in the community, and they were the ones who would basically, they would go to Annapolis, and I gave you the litany. They would go to Annapolis in the morning, see if little Timmy from Bay Ridge Gardens was here today. No, go and pick him up, bring him to school, and work with that family and that child in that school to make sure that little Timmy got what he needed. So that's how the community ambassadors started. The school system recognized that there was a schism between the school as well as the community and the families, and there needed to be a bridge between them. So they hired these folks who grew up in these communities, knew the people in the communities, were well respected, and that's how they got hired. We started off with 12. As of last year, we had 2, and this year we're down to 1. So that's how the Community Ambassadors Program worked from the initiation.
So the school system dropped the funding.
Well, yes, they dropped the funding, they dropped the positions, and I'm going to be perfectly candid and frank and honest. Sharon McKell, who's the PPW at the school system, and I started this program in '06. The beauty of the program were the people who grew up in the community. When we were no longer the supervisors of the program, and some other folks came in, and I have nothing against education, don't get me wrong, but the people that were being hired just didn't fit the bill. And some of them were even afraid to go into the communities. So once those people were hired and no longer stayed because it was obviously not a fit, the school system just didn't replace them. And that's really what happened. And the pay and no benefits and working on the weekends, it's a tough job. So the combination of all of those resulted in just having, like I said, 2 from last year and one from this year. So I'm not going to throw the school system under the bus. No, it was a combination of, that's my paycheck too. There was a combination of a lot of things that happened. And so this year and last year, Dr. Arlotto and I got together and we talked about this as well as Dr. Gillen. So we wanted to resurrect this. And I think they now see the beauty and the understanding of the importance of all this. Now getting to where now like I said, until last evening, I thought this money, at least $42,000 of it, because that was my understanding, that was set aside in the finance department. But Ms. Sutherland checked it out and found out that it had not been. So it was a surprise to me. So within the past, 18 hours? No, I don't know where. But we were working on the assumption that we had $42,000 in the finance department, and it does not exist. So I'm as surprised as you are at this point. But maybe Mrs. Sutherland can provide us with some information.
Yeah, let me do that. So Melissa has corrected me. So we entered into a contract in fiscal year 18, the current fiscal year, for $49,200. When we entered into that contract, we should have encumbered the funds at that time. We did not encumber the funds at that time, but the Board of Ed also didn't fill the positions until pretty late in the year, and they have subsequently agreed that they'll pay for this year out of their pocket. Melissa told me that the money in 18 was part of the police department transfer that you approved. So it is budgeted in the police department in fiscal year 18. Same thing happened in fiscal year 17. It was part of a transfer in the police department. So it was funded in both 17 and 18 in the police department. When the positions were not filled at the time that the budget was introduced, Mr. Miller cut it, and there is no funding in the FY19 budget for it. The positions have since been filled, at least the two of them.
The two of them.
And the Board of Ed agreed to pay for them through the end of this fiscal year.
So, can we ask Chief what you think of this program? And how it would work with your community?
I think it just came out of his pocket.
Chief, could you speak into the mic, please?
Initially, when we got the 1.25 in February of 17, right? It was part of that package because we weren't going to fill 10 police positions. So that money went for community ambassadors.
Crisis response.
Crisis response, prisoner transport, et cetera.
I think it was strengthening families.
Right. So we really had nothing to do with it. From what I'm listening, it sounds like a great idea, and it's kind of coincides with some of the other programs. I forgot the name of it, but like Helping Hands or something with the children about calling a school.
Oh, Handle with Care.
That's it. Thank you.
That's
I couldn't
something brand
remember.
new.
Yeah, but it seems like it's along the same lines, and I would certainly support it, but I don't think it should fall under the police department. I think it's more of an interaction, but.
Or should not, Lemmy, could this be part of what Lieutenant Kraus is doing as far as the whole community outreach or not? I mean, I'm just trying to figure it out.
I'd have to look at the full details, but, you know, it's something that we could do, because I don't know exactly where you would fit it anywhere else, but, you know, I'd like some time to consider it and talk to Lieutenant Kraus about it.
And we can meet and talk. Thank you, Alderman Arnett. That's a good suggestion. Something else I was going to say, but go ahead.
Chief, let me ask. Alderwoman Pendel-Charles mentioned a litany of summer programs. Do any of those programs include, or are they inclusive of the many programs that you have in your department?
So she did mention that APD is running camps. We have 11 camps scheduled this summer. One for every week except for the last week prior to school. And then we've also have had discussions about doing movie nights in Hackle properties.
Right,
so.
right.
And is that inclusive of the fishing camps and all those kinds of, that's inclusive of
Fishing,
everything?
CSI, kickball tournament, and so lots of things going on.
Okay, thank you.
The other camps that I haven't mentioned, but since I see all our directors out there, we have also discussed having How Our City Works pop-up camp, where, say for instance, we might have five children who would say, go visit Mr. Gerald and see what he does on a daily basis, and some of his employees and staff. Also, any of our other departments, including police, fire, transportation, rec and parks, planning and zoning, HR, and just to maybe for 2 hours give them a tour, an example of a typical day of what our city does, finance. And so I think that would give the children a great opportunity, especially the middle schoolers, as far as how they live here. How does it all, thank you so much, how does this all operate?
Thank you, Alderwoman. And I'm looking at directors' heads, and all you need are middle school kids to follow you around during the day.
But one other thing I want to mention before I forget, the Handle with Care program. About 2 months ago, Sergeant McGuinness and Vaden and I went to a presentation, what was quite a few people in the room in Crownsville, for Handle with Care. And this is how basically Handle with Care works. The police department respond to a neighborhood where a traumatic experience has occurred. The children are there, they're up in arms, the parents are up in arms, whatever it may be. And of course, you know, the next day, especially with any age child, you're gonna have some residuals from the child, whether it's behavioral or something, the next morning. So the police department fill out a form, make a report, and they connect with, usually, I think, the principal. The principal then connects with the guidance counselor and the teacher. They don't necessarily tell them exactly what the situation is, but they give them some information saying this child may exhibit some sort of negative behavior that morning, kind of on the alert. And so when this occurs, or the counselor may say, well, come in, let's talk about how's your day going, and that sort of thing, because that's what I see on a daily basis. So anyway, that's what Handle with Care is. So I thought it was very good. I got in touch with the school system folks. They're supposed to be rolling it out, so we're going to be part of it. They did not have city police involved. They had county, and I reminded them that these schools are located in the city, so they have now engaged with us. So just to give you that program.
Thank you. Let's call on Alderwoman Tierney.
Thank you.
And it is Friday, so let
Thank
me
you. Yes, thank
remind
you.
everyone that it is
Thank
10
you.
after 5.
Thank you.
Thank you, Acting Mayor, I'm confused, Finlayson. And thank you to the Finance Committee. I think I did attend a few of those meetings, and maybe that's one of the reasons for why I'm speaking right now, because I have seen the work that you've done, and, you know, hitting your heads against the wall and all. But let's just rein it back a little bit here, and thank you for your, oh my gosh, your endless effort on your issue. But let's just rein it back a little bit here on why we're here on a Friday afternoon with the department heads sitting there patiently, et cetera, that the elephant in the room is the 13 cents. And I'm looking at the long ball. I'm looking at the disenchanted. I'm looking at the retirees in my ward. I'm looking at the poor people in my ward that are not going to be able to afford to live here. And I'm sitting here while my colleague is talking, and it's gnawing at me that we're not there yet. With due respect, I can't, we're not there yet. We need to be able to be at a place where we can make those ads and feel comfortable with the tax increase that we're asking. And we have to ask some tough questions. And my next question was going to be, before my colleague spoke, was, you know, what is the impact of a hiring freeze, and where can we save money there? Those are the broad questions we need to ask, because a 13-cent increase is going to have some of my residents move to the county, and where does that get us in the long term? So is there a question here? My first question is, City Manager, is where does our tax increase weigh compared to other, like the county, for example? Where is this increase going to put us in the spectrum if it's at 13 cents?
I haven't done that comparison.
Okay, all right.
The county tax rate, I think, is around 90 cents.
Mm-hmm.
But the city residents pay a city tax rate, they pay a county tax rate on
Yeah,
top
we're-
of that.
Yeah, we're double taxed, yeah.
You're not double taxed.
Well-
You're taxed for different things.
Right, okay, thank
Right,
you.
so you're taxed within the city for the city police department, the city fire department, the city
Yeah.
public works. You're taxed within the county for those services that the county provides, that the city does not, that the city uses, like the schools, the detention center, the sheriff's office, the circuit court, those types of things. So the tax rate that the city residents pay to the county is much lower than the tax rate the county residents pay to the county. But I have not made that comparison. I do know the city tax rate plus the county tax rate on city citizens together is more than the county tax rate on county residents.
Okay. I think, and I'll just end with this, is that before we have discussions on the, 30,000, 60,000, 10,000, is how do we get from 13 cents to 9 cents? How do we get there first? And then we can have these discussions about the 30,000 and the 10,000. I don't know if my colleagues agree with that, but we've got to have that discussion. Because I don't think the 13 cents is acceptable. It's,
So the way you get from 13 cents to 9,
mhm.
you have two ways of getting there. You can cut expenditures $2.6 million. And given that there are departments whose entire budget, not entire budgets, who 90% or more of their budgets are personal services, personnel costs, salaries, and benefits, you're not going to be able to cut office supplies and get there. Okay. The other thing you can do is not cut the budgets, and you can pay for certain expenses out of fund balance, which is the practice in the past. So you are using non-recurring revenue to pay for recurring expenses. Your third option is you do as the Finance Committee suggested this morning, and for roads and sidewalks, which the mayor has proposed to fund with PAYGO, you fund with bonds instead, or you don't do it all. Or you don't, so that's, almost 3 cents right there if you were to bond fund roads and sidewalks. You can consider a hiring freeze. If you consider a hiring freeze, I would suggest that it's disingenuous to add new positions only to freeze them. So you need to consider your policy choices of adding new positions while at the same time implementing a hiring freeze. I will tell you very explicitly, it is too late to consider furloughs and layoffs. We have been negotiating with the unions for more than 6 months. We have a tentative agreement with the fire department. We will be accused of negotiating in bad faith. We will get sued for negotiating in bad faith. And given that we have $15 million in savings, I would suggest to you they're likely to win. So you can cut $2.6 million. You can pay for expenses out of fund balance. You can choose to not, you can choose a different funding source for something that could be bond funded, or you can do some combination of all of those things.
Mhm. One, I lied, I have another question. I think the whoever's watching and all, could you tell us what that fund balance percentage ideally is?
So right now, the current policy is that the fund balance will be, unassigned general fund balance will be 15% of government-wide expenditures. That is the current policy. That would make it about $18 million under the budgets as they have been proposed to you.
And that 15% is standard practice, or?
It's what the bond rating agencies would like us to have in reserves.
Okay.
For our bond, to protect our bond rating, to ensure that we're fiscally stable and sustainable.
Okay, because that's a big given.
Oh, it's a huge given.
Yeah.
It's a huge given, and I will remind all of you that the rating agencies have said, and this is a quote from Standard & Poor's last summer, the city has a very weak debt and contingent liability profile, in part because we don't fund our pension plan fully, in part because we only have, our OPEB plan is 7% funded. It is 93% unfunded. Our debt is at the maximum capacity it can be. I have recommended that you change your fund balance policy to be 15% of general fund revenue, parking revenue, and transportation revenue, because those are the two funds that the general fund's going to bail out. Water and sewer fund, they're solid. And so if you did that, instead of 18 million, you would need to have 15 million of fund balance, which is exactly where Melissa and I are projecting the fund balance is going to be at the end of FY18.
Okay, thank you.
And can you speak to what is proposed spending out of that fund balance? This morning you shared. We
Right
were
now,
going
I think it's about 157,000. You're talking the capital reserve fund. That's different. Two different things. Unassigned fund balance. I think the proposal is to spend 157,000 roughly, which is on one-time expenditures for the bulletproof vests at the fire department, the casework management software in the law office, and the Microsoft Office upgrade for the city.
Okay, that's all that.
That's it.
Okay. Alderman Savage.
And that is figured into our
Okay.
calculations.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'm wondering also, before I get into it, like when we may like to end this, if we have a target end time for this meeting. Anybody need to leave?
I need to leave at 5:30, but
May I then propose just a discussion on the two amendments to the fee schedule that I had? I didn't know we were gonna circle around to closing.
I have
Well,
one
we
quick
have two
question.
questions over here.
And I have
so-
one quick question.
Okay,
Well,
okay.
Okay, yeah.
'Cause
that's
I'm gonna
reasonable.
propose 5:30, 5:45 at the latest.
Okay, yeah, and maybe we could schedule another meeting at some point.
and
For
yeah,
next week.
that's what I proposed this morning, 'cause knowing that this will probably require more conversation, so maybe Thursday of next week is what.
I'm not sure we can do that.
We don't have any, because your work session is Thursday, we don't have anybody
It can't be
here
staffed.
on Thursday because of prior office, we don't have any office coverage. Nobody in
But
person.
Thursday,
and
we-
Friday have one staff person. So, because of the,
Bless you.
because we had no way of knowing that you guys were going to do this.
But this is the week, it's the week right before the budget, I think, before we vote on the budget, we need.
Well, I thought that the purpose of this work session was to hear what the proposed amendments were gonna be. And we've heard, are there others who have amendments that you propose to put? I'm seeing, Ms. Alderwoman Henson shake her head, so, why don't we hear from the two aldermen who, Ross, you're next, and then,
And I have one quick question for Ms.
Okay.
Sullivan.
I just wanna get the amendments out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not gonna make my response, I want to hear.
Okay.
Okay, Alderwoman?
Really quick.
No, take the time you need.
They're just amendments to the fee
As
schedule.
chairperson,
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll send these out to everyone. There are just two amendments to the fee schedule. The first is cost neutral. It is an amendment to the Pitt Moyer Rec Center fees. If you ever heard me campaigning, I've said a million times, a family membership for four for a city resident is $643. I'm proposing an amendment to allow a family of four membership to be paid on a monthly basis. So instead of paying the $643 all at once, it would be paid at $53.58 per month, which is just a prorated share. The negatives on that were the concerns raised by the city manager of people abusing that. A person who could pay it all at once, electing to pay it on a monthly basis instead, and then perhaps opting out by canceling the credit card or whatever. The goal was to allow people who would otherwise not be able to afford it. So what I did was put the caveat on the amendment so that people who were already participating in a means-tested program, if you were receiving medical assistance, temporary cash assistance, or food stamps already, so that way a person's need for an affordable program was already vetted by those other agencies. So we weren't trying to determine who needed a discount. That was already done by another agency. So it has that person bringing their award letter to the Pitt Moyer Rec Center, and then the Rec Center would determine that they were then eligible for a monthly membership rate as opposed to having to pay that fee all at once. The second challenge I then had to...
Before we go on, may I ask you to request of the director to send information as to why we changed from the previous procedure of charging monthly?
May I-
Because there was some anomaly to that. I don't know what it was.
So just to clarify my comments, it wasn't that I was concerned that this would go to people who could afford to pay. My concern was the staff time that was involved, and this was what the problem was before, was you set it up for a recurring monthly payment, and then the person, changes their credit card number or whatever, and then the amount of staff time that was spent trying to track it down and get them signed back up. So what I think I put in an email to you is I would suggest if we do this, something happens and your automatic payment doesn't go through, right? You come in, so the rec center knows that, you come in, you say, your membership, didn't get renewed, you let them fix that one time. When it happens a second time, then you stop the privilege.
That seems totally reasonable.
That's how I would recommend you do it, but we don't want to have the staff have to continually be trying to chase down credit cards for effective payments. It's simply, it is canceled because you didn't renew. When you come in to use it, you gotta give them the right credit card, we set you up again, happens a second time, you've lost. And and I also really don't want our staff to have to get into looking at people's private information on means testing and things. I don't think that would be appropriate.
So,
So,
I think an award letter from, I think there are other things that people are only eligible for if they are participating in other means-tested programs. I don't think that people who are participating in means-tested programs would find it uncommon to have an award letter and to show your award letter as documentation to
okay,
be
I was simply
eligible.
saying, my concern wasn't, that we should only extend this to people who couldn't otherwise afford. I don't even mind extending it to people who can afford to do it all up front. It was the staff time involved in administering it if the credit cards changed and trying to chase them down. So that's my only comment on that. And I think Barb was familiar with that issue as well. I don't know if Archie wants to weigh in or not.
Thank you.
My
Your second one?
My second one was a free student fare program where students who are Annapolis City residents who are students grade K through 12 could ride our public transit for free during the school year. That program is not cost neutral. It would cost $12,708 is the anticipated impact to transit revenue. I did have discussions with Director Gordon on that. So we would have to fund that, and I do have some proposed reductions to make up for that, to be able to fund that. I did have it was an ordinance originally, and then the legislative assistant said, no, you can accomplish this just through the fee, through an amendment to the fee schedule. In the whereases and all of those sections, I kind of laid out the case for that. I think that for several reasons. One, we obviously have a need to increase our ridership on our Annapolis Transit. I did have a study that I cited in there. When people ride public transit when they are young, there is a far greater likelihood that they will continue to ride public transit throughout their life. I think we have a natural ridership when we encourage our students to ride public transit. So I think it is a great sign for the city to say, hey, ride your public transit, to encourage that for our students. I think the second is the Anne Arundel County Public Schools, of course, provide transportation for our public school students. The current policy is that if you live within 1.5 miles of your middle school or 1 mile of your elementary school, that you walk to school. There are days where it is cold, where it is snow on the ground, where it is raining, and our students are walking to school, but they are walking past an Annapolis Transit bus stop, where Annapolis Transit buses are passing our students with snow on the ground and with rain, and they are walking to school. So I would like to see our students have the ability to ride our Annapolis City buses, and our buses be there as a resource for our students on days like that. I wanted to limit it to just the school year, so that the student fare, they have a program for students during the summer so that it doesn't impact the revenue during the summer, but that it is a resource for the students during the year. So you will see that as well, and then I'll send it out in an email with kind of more information that explains what the goal is there and why I feel like it's a good program to have. Thank you.
Okay, Alderman Arnett, thank you.
Thank you, and I'll try to be very brief. I wanted to respond to Alderwoman Tierney's question, which is, why are we talking about all of these enhancements when we haven't addressed the major increase in the tax rate? And I would like to offer an answer to that, and a very brief one, because it's what freezes the Finance Committee and the Council every year. And I would submit that obviously a way, and I certainly, when I was presenting in Ward 2, had a member from Ward 1 berate me mercilessly about how I and all the rest of the council members are so stupid You stop the 13-cent rate increase by firing a whole bunch of people. It's simple. Well, it's not simple, and I would submit to you that none of us, no matter how well-intended or intelligent, know how to do that. We do not have the information. First of all, we don't have the information from our constituents, what it is they no longer want to receive, and even if we had that, I couldn't tell Archie or Rick or Chief what to do to reduce his force. I don't have that knowledge. I may think that it's a grand idea, but I don't know how to do that. And I think that that only resides really with the administration, probably with the city manager in conjunction with each of the department heads in the finance department. So I have never felt more helpless in my life as we watched this tide of tax rate increase, and when we went through it one by one, and I had this big notion about how we were going to slice, it turns out you can't. These are commitments we've made. These are negotiations we've made with our staff. These are things that are very hard to do. So I suggested to that gentleman that he move to Ward 8, run for election. The second he was ready for a special election, I would resign, and he could get in here and do all of that. But I don't think we're up to it. I don't think we're set up for it. I do think we need to explore it. I'm hoping that Fred's audit committee, with help from the city manager, can look at that. I think we can find some efficiencies, but mainly we're going to go back to our constituents, I think, with largely tough questions. Do you really only want to have 90 police officers? Do you want to close the Eastport Fire Station? Do you want to sell the Pip Moyer Rec Center? You know, that's the only way we're going to hold these costs down. Otherwise, just like the rest of the world, cost of doing business goes up. And as I said in the presentation at Maryland Hall, an immutable fact seems to be that citizens want these services that they want and need, but they don't want to pay for services that they don't use or they don't want. And that's how it looks so easy to make these tax cuts. So I know that's a little soapbox opera here, but I do think that if we're really going to get serious about reducing the tax rate, we have to start on July 1st with the audit committee and the city manager, and we need to start with the citizen survey that we're funding to say, you tell us, you don't want to pay this, that's fine. You get to tell us that. But you got to tell us what it is you no longer want to receive, including trees, limbs that are about to fall on them as they go past the corner of 6th Street and Chester, which is hanging fire. So, you know, I think we have to start looking at this in a very different way, and I think we have a new team in place that can tell us the numbers, and I think we have a new committee that we passed last year that can start looking at where there might be efficiencies, and we have a vehicle to ask people, fine, we'll cut your tax rate 10 cents, but here's what you're going to miss, here's what you're not going to get. So I think we do have to answer your question, but I don't think we can answer it before the 18th of June.
Alderman Savage?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I do think, I would like to see some more information about, so let me back up. I do think there's more that we can talk about. Again, for example, I think we should go through some of the enhancements that are still proposed to be funded to see if there's any more. I know the committee talked a lot about, so I think we should start where the committee left off. I mean, because I think there are some positions, for example, you know, $20,000 going to the city lobbyists. I don't really think we need that. I think that's the mayor's job, is to lobby. I mean, there are a lot of things. I do want to get information about the vacant positions from the list I've seen, which I'm not sure if it's the most up to date. I mean, I think that's over $2 million worth of positions, and about 1.5 million that are still in the process. I mean, still have not been finalized. So that's a lot of savings we could potentially realize even just through freezes. So I think if we get that information and get it out to everybody, I think that'd be worth talking about, because I'm just not comfortable. I want to build a firm foundation before we start adding rooms to the house. And I think the Finance Committee's done an admirable job about getting us to build that firm foundation, but I just don't think it's time to be adding on all these new positions and things. I think we need to see how we recover this next year, and then we can talk about, I'm not doubting the merits at all of your proposal, Alderwoman. I think those positions are needed. I'm not doubting the need for an assistant city manager, but I just think this is the wrong time to be adding those kind of things. And that discussion, I don't want to, again, open up a whole other can of worms this evening, but that's why I think it's important to try to meet again. I wonder if there's something we could figure out, if nobody from your office is available, if there's anybody we could get just trained quickly to do some of the tasks that we might be able to need to meet again before the budget.
We are working on it. I put in a call to Captain Amoya, and he has some people on light duty, but he hasn't responded back to me yet. So once he responds back to me, we could have that person cover our office for the day, and then the deputy city clerk could come and fill in for your meeting. But I don't have a response back, so I didn't want to say yes until we had a yes.
Well, I have to take a point of personal privilege as a member of the Finance Committee. We've had 22 meetings. We've interviewed all the directors at length, and several of them multiple times. There's only $500,000 in positions, and I think using the term new positions is a misnomer, because they are positions that have not been funded, but the work never went away. And when we talk about eliminating people, we have to talk about that in conjunction with eliminating services, because we can't do one without the other. Every one of our employees has a full-time job, and in many cases they have a job and a half and sometimes 2 jobs, because positions have been eliminated but the workload has not been. So I would warn us against suggesting that we have people that are sitting out there just not doing anything, and we can eliminate those people and not eliminate and not impact the services we provide to the community, because that's impossible. Before I talk about the Finance Committee recommendation, I went to a community meeting last night. Chief Baker was there also. And I spoke about our budget and the 13-cent increase. And I went through very briefly some of the things that are being funded in this 13 cents. And I'm here today, so they didn't hurt me. They didn't even suggest that this was not what was needed, because I was able to explain to them why it is needed. And the one comment that I got was, no matter what you do, you make sure you take care of the pension obligations for our employees. That was the one comment that I got. Nothing negative at all. So while we hear a lot of concerns, there are people out there, and when we disseminate the accurate information, I truly believe they understand. When you say our debt service goes up $1.9 million and that equals 3 cents on the tax, for the tax increase, they get it. Because many of them have mortgages. They understand you got to pay that interest. So I would suggest that we share this document widely and offer explanations as needed. This document includes the Finance Committee's recommendations and the most latest. So we are not at 13 cents. I'm talking about the Finance Committee recommendations. We are now at 10.5 cents per 100. So if you follow the recommendations for the Finance Committee, that's where we are in the tax increase. Now, if you don't want to follow this, you can go back to 13 cents, or you can cut other things and go down to 9.9, which is where we were before we found some other anomalies we had to address. But please don't think that we can cut people and not impact services, because that's not gonna happen. This represents good financial management. The bonding rating agencies have told us these are the kinds of things we should be doing and not impact our bond rating. So keep that in mind as we're bringing back recommendations. Now, staff has told us that next week is not going to work well, because they have given up 22 days also to help us. So we need to be fair also. We don't direct staff. That lady directs staff. Okay, and that would be you, Ms. Sutherland, just in case
I
you
saw
missed that. So, you know, maybe we have to talk amongst ourselves and get back on the 18th and work out these issues. But you have a good working document right here. And I'm gonna have to call on Alderwoman Pendel Charles first.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Chairman Arnett, as well as Alderwoman Finlayson and Alderman Rodriguez for the yeoman job they have done, and also city staff, and Ms. Sutherland, who has come in here and done a tremendous job. Number two, I forgot what I was going to say.
I'll come back to you.
No, one of them was, if we, and just listening to everybody on the dais, and we all know, and I think everybody knows, every ward is different. And what I'm hearing is definitely shows the difference in every ward. No ifs, ands, and buts about it. What goes on in wards 1 and 8 is not necessarily going on with 6, 4, and 3. Bottom line, that's the end of the story. So what we feel passionate about or what we see may not resonate, and that's the word I'm going to use, with the other wards. And as far as the survey is concerned, there are going to be some people who are not going to, we know the people going to fill out the surveys, we know who they are, and we know the people who aren't. That should not dictate what we do or what we don't do. But what I wanted to mention to Ms. Sutherland, as far as a combination, as far as fund balance and how we bring it down to maybe 10 and balancing that out, that's something maybe we can kind of take a look at. Where we go into the fund balance to bring it to 10 or 9 or 11.
Okay, so if you go to fund balance to bring it to 10 or 9 or 11, you are going to be below the 15% target. You can do that with a majority vote of 6. If you do that, you must concurrently adopt a replenishment plan to bring the fund balance back up to 15% within 3 years. So you can do it. But there is a concurrent plan that has to be adopted at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
Alderwoman Henson.
I think our directors came out and they indulged us, and we used the word hiring freeze, and there are a number of positions that are currently being interviewed for, where there are candidates for, and it sounds like we may not have the opportunity to all convene again before we come back on the 18th. I think it is fair to give them the opportunity, if we just state what the positions are that are currently being considered, to give them the opportunity to state what impact that may have. They are all executives within the city, so it may be that they say, this is a position that we may still be able to function without. They may say, this is a position that is absolutely critical, but I would like to not make this decision operating on an assumption. While we have the department heads here, I would like to have the opportunity to hear from them on the impact of freezing these positions if we don't choose to fill them in the next budget. So if it's the will of the body, I would like to have the opportunity to hear from them on the potential impact of not funding the positions.
Well, I would assume that our city manager would allow us to reach out to the department heads and make that request of them.
That's why they're here.
Okay.
Okay. So in the finance department, there are 3 positions that are currently vacant. There is the accounting associate 3, accounting associate 3, and of course the finance director. So is there anyone from the finance committee that can address the impact of?
You're going to want someone from the finance office?
I'm not in the committee,
finance
yes.
committee. But let me
Correct.
address the finance director position. If you want me to straighten out your finance office, you got to fund my finance director.
Is that salary competitive? Is that
Yes.
something that you would be advertising? And
Yes.
Okay, so it would not be something that we would be going significantly up from? It is
No.
that number that's there?
Yes.
Okay, and then the two account associate positions there, are those something?
I will let Melissa address that.
Okay,
One of the accounting associate 3 positions is actually our payroll coordinator. The payroll position that we had, just the woman who was in that for a long time, just went to the human resource department. We do not have the staff in our office to take on that responsibility. They are all already have full-time jobs. The second accounting associate 3 position, I am hoping to fill somebody who has a great amount of experience in general ledger, that's someone that can assist us with the audit. And if we are to get back on track and getting the audit done timely and by the deadlines that Sutherland requires and is in the city code, then we really need to fill that position.
who's doing the payroll now?
Dee Creek from HR. She's doing it while she's in HR. Right.
So it was a position that only in the last 2-3 weeks, right? She was doing payroll, she transferred to HR, the position's vacant, so she's still doing payroll and doing HR duties at the same time.
And then the audit position, do we not contract out our auditing? We have
This is
internal
not for
audit as
the,
well?
so the way an audit works is the financial statements are the financial statements of management. Auditors audit those statements to say whether they are fairly stated or not. It is our job to compile the financial statements. It is our job to make sure that they are correct. They're just giving you an opinion whether they're correct or not. That is not the auditor's job.
So the auditing that we contract for is separate from this position?
Absolutely.
This person compiles these
This
statements
person,
that are audited?
so you've seen our audited financial statements?
Correct.
Right. This person, it's primarily fallen on Melissa and this vacant position to do that. We have not issued our audited financial statements by the deadline in the city code in more than a decade. I actually think the city code deadline is unrealistic. It's October and it can't be done by October. So I'm going to propose that we amend the city code to say December, but having said that, you haven't been getting them until mid-March. You can't develop a budget for the next year when you don't have your audited financial statements until mid-March. It's part of the Office of Finance reforms that desperately need to be implemented in this city.
How long has that position been vacant?
A while. But I would suggest to you, perhaps that's why one of the reasons we're in the position we're in.
Is that a competitive salary, $52,000 for an auditor?
It's for an accountant associate.
So it's an account
It's an accounting associate, and yes, it is.
Thank you.
Alderwoman, do you have something for all the department heads?
I have finance, MIT, police, fire, DPW, streets, rec and parks, water, transportation.
Okay, so all the departments. I was trying to give them an out. Do you need a verbal comment from each of them?
Anyone that's interested, anyone.
Well, I think they would all want to respond to you. So can I ask that you send them an email and then you share their responses with everyone? Is that a...
I could, but then any member of the general public who may want to also understand, have a deeper understanding,
Okay.
wouldn't have the benefit of knowing.
Okay.
But I could.
And if I could
not
just point
believe
out,
her.
you are correct that from this vacancy list that was just generated in the last couple of days, so you had an accurate list. It does total 2.1 million, 2.2 million, but keep in mind that 400,000 of that is not in the general fund. It's not going to help you in any way with your tax increase.
Do we know what positions those associate to?
Yes, vacant utility mechanic 2, vacant equipment operator 1 in water, vacant accounting associate in the transportation department, vacant fleet technician 1, and vacant fleet maintenance technician 2.
Thank
So
you.
what are
And
those
how many
positions?
of those, any of those in the police department of the...
In the police department, there are 9 vacancies. 4 of them are officers, sworn, 2 officer first class and 2 lieutenants, and 3 are police communication operators, the dispatchers. 1 is a police records specialist, and 1 is the Safe Streets coordinator.
Ms. Sutherland, what is our plan for funding the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 positions that aren't funded in the budget currently? The 400,000 that you stated are not in the budget.
What is our plan for funding them? They
Yeah.
are in the budget. They're not on the vacancy list because they're not existing approved positions. They are in the budget.
So if they were not
You would say
filled, you
481,000.
would still save? Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I understand
Right.
what you're saying.
And I also want to point out on the police department, the sum of all those 9 positions, which include the 3 police communication operators and 4 sworn positions, is 900,000, but we've already budgeted $220,000 of attrition in the police department, knowing that those positions are going to be vacant for at least part of the year. So even if you were to cut the entire amount, you're not going to get a $900,000 reduction, you're going to get a $680,000 reduction. Because we already cut 220. Knowing that on July 1st, they weren't all going to be filled.
Thank you.
Next.
MIT has a vacant position, Accounting Associate 3. Is there anyone from MIT?
There's Ms. Smith. What's the next department, so we can have them on, in queue?
Police. Police?
Police next, come on down. We've already dealt with police, so.
Barbara Smith, the acting MIT manager. The accounting associate 3 position became vacant on June 1st. That position was transferred from finance a number of years ago and is actually acting as a support technician. She's been gone for a week now, and we are already feeling it in regards of answering the telephone, assisting all of our end users. She was also our primary person for support on Microsoft Office and Microsoft Excel. We are in the process of interviewing.
So is that position currently filled by someone?
No, it's not, as of last Friday.
Oh, so you're saying the person used to perform all those functions and you're currently interviewing for someone for that position?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And it was a position that used to be in what department? The finance department?
It was in finance a number of years ago. She's been
Okay.
with us for about 4 years.
And then with that person being vacant for the week, is someone else picking up those duties, or what's being done there?
Our GIS coordinator and our webmaster are finding themselves spending a great deal of their time answering support calls and assisting our customers. So their work is not getting done.
And GIS is worth its weight in gold.
Yes, it is.
And I'd
She
like
is.
to add that that department is down 1 staff person, period, because of the departure of the previous director. And Ms. Smith has picked up that responsibility along with her own job.
As best I could.
Thank you.
Please say yes.
And then, Chief? It looks like the department has several vacancies. I believe Ms. Sutherland read all the vacancies. It looks like they're in various stages, from interviews to candidates that are through the process of polygraphs and various stages of hire, to some listings having expired, to some that are up for promotions. So can you speak to the impact it may have on the department for the various officer, looks like Officer 1C, there are 2 positions. Police Communications Operations has 3 positions, Police Record Specialist, Safe Streets Coordinator, and 2 Police Lieutenant positions.
Okay, so I spoke earlier this week about the impact of our light duty personnel. We are currently at 118, so actually we have 5 police vacancies open, 6 police vacancies open. The impact is that I also have 21 soft vacancies, meaning that we're operating with, if I can do my math right, 97 people out of 118. So what's happening is we're just focused on our core functions for the most part, because all my discretionary, most of my discretionary units are gone. To lose the availability to hire police officers is going to have an impact on what we can do proactively instead of responding to call. When it comes to dispatchers, we're in the interview process now. They've actually put some through polygraphs. We have been 3 to 4 dispatchers down over the last 2 years and have been funding that through overtime. And so in order to get our overtime budget down, to get them properly staffed, we just had a hiring process where we've gotten very good quality applicants, and for the first time can hire 3 people out of that process.
Do we share any of our dispatch duties with the county, or is that all done through the city?
The county picks up the 911 call, and if it's specific to Annapolis, they transfer the call to us, and we answer the call, dispatch the call, et cetera. The county does all of the fire department's dispatching.
If all of these positions were for hire today, what is the average time it takes from the day you advertise the position to the person's first day on the job?
3 months, but then it's a 6-month training period before they're released on their own.
Shanika, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Finlayson. On these new hires, and I have to ask this question because I don't know the answer, is there a difference between the cost of a sworn-in hire versus
a lateral versus
a
a new
citizen?
hire. A lateral versus a new hire. So a lateral comes from another agency that's already trained, and we go through the same hiring process that we would for what I would call a new hire or non-certified officer.
But non-certified versus certified, there is a cost.
There is a cost difference because we don't have to spend 6 months with them, paying them while they're in the academy. Certified police officer, we can get up and running probably from start, let's say from application to on the road independent, 3 months, 4 months. Once they're hired, it's about 240 hours of time with an FTO before they're released.
So that's your...
That's a lot faster.
And that's what you're doing? That's what
We're doing a combination of both.
Of both, okay. Now, a dispatcher is what? Is that a sworn-in officer? Or,
No, that's a
that's
civilian
just a civilian?
position. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Okay, so are we trying to optimize those civilian positions where we can versus a sworn-in?
So that's when we get to those other two,
Okay.
the record specialists, et cetera.
Yeah. Okay.
So we have a record specialist position open, and we have developed a contract to move somebody from a director's position into that record specialist position. And not to fill just the record specialist position, but to help us with CALEA, Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies, and for hiring. I think several cycles ago in the CALEA process, they suggested to us that we hire a civilian to do our CALEA accreditation. And the reason for that is you have an officer there, that officer gets promoted, then you've got to retrain somebody else to do the process, and then you got to train somebody else because they move, they retire, et cetera. So if we have a civilian in there, it solidifies the position and, you know, helps us get through the accreditation. I'm getting to the point that, you know, and that frees up an officer as well. I'm getting to the point that if I'm running out of officers, I may have to reconsider being accredited, and I don't think that's what anybody